When I learned that there were a group of people in the gay pride parade in New York City who were chanting, "We're coming for the kids," and I combined that when the Los Angeles Dodgers decided they would honor a group of weirdos who go around making fun of nuns, dress up in weird costumes, deliberately attack the whole life of women religious, and have people who dress up as Christ and go around pretending that Christ engages in religious activities with the nuns. I decided it was time to speak out and say, all right, it's time to stand up to evil, call it what it is, and defend our children and defend our country. And I thought to myself, knowing what I had learned while Callisto was the ambassador to the Vatican, of the thousands and thousands of women religious who take care of children around the world, who serve in hospitals and places in Central Africa, who teach people in South Sudan, who work in the poorest neighborhoods. And I thought of Mother Teresa, who had come to the Congress when I was Speaker, and whose entire life was a life devoted to service. And it hit me, this isn't a joke. This isn't a bunch of people being smart alecks. These people are evil. They are out there deliberately smearing, attacking, and undermining people whose only goal is to serve God and to help people in need. And I thought to myself, there are so many places now where we are tolerant when we should be intolerant. I think it's time to be intolerant of violent criminals. I think it's time to be intolerant of people who want to oppress you and tell you what you're allowed to think and what you're allowed to do. I think that we need to learn to be intolerant of those who believe they can lie and get away with it. I think we should be intolerant of FBI agents who break the law and who basically caused the United States 5 or 6 years of confusion, weakened government, and basically smeared a president of the United States, knowing what they were doing was both false and illegal. And I think we need to decide the toleration cannot extend to those things which are destructive of our very society. Some of this will be very controversial. I think, for example, that we have to be prepared to stand up and say, we're not going to tolerate the Chinese communists penetrating our country. We're not going to tolerate people dealing with fentanyl. When you realize that we now lose to drug overdoses annually, every year, twice as many people as we lost in the 8 years of the Vietnam War. Literally, every year, we lose twice as many people as the people who are recorded on the wall in Washington honoring those who died in Vietnam. And yet, we continue to accept it, to tolerate it. The truth is, we're sooner or later going to go back to drug testing. We're sooner or later going to decide that we can't afford, we can't tolerate the kind of destruction of our children, and we can't afford and we can't tolerate schools that refuse to teach, teachers' unions that refuse to show up. We can't afford and tolerate politicians who are crooked. When you learn that $20 billion was stolen from the California unemployment compensation system, maybe it's time to be a little bit intolerant. There had to be a lot of crooks involved in order to steal $20 billion through identity theft. So I think I hope, for the sake of America, that we're at the end of a long cycle where every time you turned around, you were told you shouldn't render judgment. You shouldn't insist, for example, that mathematics actually matters. You shouldn't require people to learn how to read. You shouldn't emphasize the work ethic. I think that model, which has no standards, which basically says all of us who do work have an obligation to give up much of what we work for to people who won't work, not people who can't work. That's different. If you have a severe disability, then I think, frankly, we should do everything we can to help you lead the fullest possible life, because we're endowed by our Creator, all of us, including those who have very significant challenges. But if you're able-bodied and you're just lazy, maybe it's time to say that. And maybe it's time to look people in the face and say, you ought to get off your tail and go out and get a job. And any job beats sitting around doing nothing, because it teaches you the habit of showing up. It teaches you the habit of actually earning something. It teaches you how to engage with other people. And in the long run, whatever your first job is, there can be a second job and a third job and a fourth job. And if you don't get any job, you just decay. And your children learn that going to work's irrelevant, studying's irrelevant, homework is irrelevant. And that literally destroys their life. So I think the time has come to recognize that this long downward spiral that led to hundreds of thousands of people being homeless in the wealthiest country in history. Now that's a problem of how we've structured things, not a problem about money. It's not even a problem about individuals. We have created systems in which we refuse to take care of those who are genuinely mentally ill. We refuse to intervene with those who are drug addicted. We refuse to insist that people learn how to be citizens. And then we're shocked, we're surprised that, in fact, people often will decay to the lowest possible denominator. And that there are some people who are just plain bad. Now, this is straightforward judgment. You show me a rapist, a murderer, an armed robber. You show me somebody who will go out and prey upon an 80-year-old woman. I'll show you somebody who we should be dealing with as though they were evil, not misunderstood, not having a bad childhood, not requiring therapy. These are people who shouldn't be on the street threatening their fellow citizens. And that requires a dramatic change in all of our legal and criminal systems in the big cities. I had a friend recently say to me, gee, we need to figure out how to stop crime because there's so much violence and there's so many killings. And I said, no, we don't. I'm a historian. We absolutely know how to do it. Rudy Giuliani did it with Chief Bill Bratton. Michael Bloomberg built on it. And in a period of about 12 years, they'd made New York City one of the safest cities on the entire planet. In fact, by the end of Bloomberg's second term, after 16 years of applying the same principles of effective, intelligent law enforcement, including locking up people who are dangerous and violent, Staten Island was so safe that it was off the charts. There was no city of 600,000 anywhere in America as safe as Staten Island. But then along came people who didn't believe in locking up criminals, didn't believe in supporting the police, didn't believe that violence was unacceptable, and places began to decay to a point where today, in cities like San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, we're seeing civilization recede. We're seeing stores leave because they can't stand the level of theft. We're seeing people leave because they're tired of being frightened. And I think we have to recognize these are problems of choice. They're not inevitable. And we have chosen over the last 30 or 40 years to tolerate greater and greater deviancy of negative, destructive, dangerous behavior. We've chosen to turn a cheek as people go more violent, as people die of drugs, and we wring our hands, but we don't really do anything about it because it would be a very wrenching thing to decide to become a drug-free country again, which we could. Other countries have. But then that means you have to be intolerant of those who are dangerous, intolerant of those who are evil, and intolerant of those who would threaten both you as an individual and would threaten your country. So I think the time has come to just plant the flag down and say flatly, we're not going to tolerate evil. We're not going to tolerate destruction. We're not going to tolerate violence. Let's figure out what the policies are that turn that into reality and not just a slogan. And I think America will be a healthier, safer, and better country as a result. My new book, March to the Majority, is now a bestseller, and it's available at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and at bookstores everywhere.